Hi, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of HINAC and our third plenary with amazing panelists that are going to introduce themselves. Thank you all for jumping in. Introduce yourselves in the chat box. I'm Kamaria with the Sarah Project, if you don't know who I am. Please interact with one another in the chat if you have questions, give some affirmations. There will be some information, some links shared as well for survey feedback for the closing, and then we'll have some information just coming from our panelists for you all to interact with them as well. I see everybody's dropping in love. Be sure that if you want attendees to see your comments in addition to the panelists, that in the chat box for the to section, you click the drop-down box so you know who you're talking to. This plenary will be we have Spanish being provided an interpretation. So instructions will be given for that as well. I think I got that started.
Right, thanks Kamaria. Gracias Kamaria. Así que la sesión de hoy va a tener interpretación en español y en inglés disponible. So our session today will have English and Spanish interpretation available because HINAC believes in language justice. To access the interpretation, please click the globe that you see at the bottom of your screen. Click the language in which you'd like to participate. And if you're joining from a cell phone or tablet, it'll be similar. Just look for 3 little dots. They'll be in a corner. And click language interpretation and make sure to hit done. Si se están uniendo a través de una computadora, nomás recuérdense de seleccionar ese globo terráqueo, luego seleccionar el lenguaje en cual les gustaría participar. Y si se están uniendo a través de un celular, una tableta, nomás buscan esos 3 puntitos, seleccionan el idioma y recuérdense de seleccionar finalizar. Y con eso podemos empezar. And with that, we can go ahead and get started.
Thank you so much, Jose. I'm going to turn it over to Devin, Wahida, and Kenyon. The floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Devin Hursey, he, him, his. I'm calling in today from Lee Summit, Missouri, and I have had the privilege of serving as the chair of the Black United Leadership Initiative for about 3 years now, also known as BULI. We are we're a coalition of Black people who are committed to seeing the end of HIV criminalization in the United States. And we've come together because we have a lot of similar experiences in the work. I want to quickly acknowledge one of the questions that I saw on Whova. Why are people with HIV only invited to assist in developing grant ideas, but never included in the project itself? So I want to say that I may not have the answer to that question, but that's definitely the type of conversations that we come together to address because like I stated, we have very similar experiences as Black people being, often pushed to the side or ignored when we're the people who are the most impacted oftentimes. So I want to take a moment to acknowledge the planning team because we've had an excellent planning team in past pre-institute iterations and in the pre-institute for this HINAC. So, excuse me, I gotta clear my throat. So I want to give a special thank you to our planning team, and I'll start with Tyler at PWN, Evany at PWN, and Vanita at PWN. Kamaria, who just opened up this this plenary. Kevin Johnson at the Black AIDS Institute, Tony Michelle with SNAPCO, Max Boykin, Diane Burkholder, and Deidre. I hope that I'm not forgetting anyone, but this team is dedicated to the work. It's always good to work with these folks. They bring so much wisdom to the table, and it's just interesting, talking with them and noticing that we have so many common experiences in this work that aren't all, we deal with some of the same struggles, and it's unfortunate, but we've come together to support each other. So just an overview of what this session is going to consist of. I'm going to turn this over to Wahida to give us a little bit of the background and history of BULI. Then we're going to have Kenyon speak to us about just some points from the BULI report and some details from our terms of reference. And then I'm going to close us out with some do's and don'ts around working with Black people in this work. Thank you. The legend, Wahida.
Thank you so much, Devin. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning for the folks over on the West Coast. My name is Wahida Shabazz L. I am, my pronouns are she, her, and beautiful. Thank you, Tony Michelle, for giving me that last pronoun. And I am from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm a founding member of Positive Women's Network. I'm a founding member of BULI, the Black United Leadership Initiative. And some people call me a legend. I think that's because I was trying to retire, and so they pumped me up. And so I'm still here doing this work because there's so much work to be done. I just cannot step away. So what I would like to do today, they asked me to give you a history of BULI, but the feminist in me couldn't allow me to do that. I wanted to give you a history of BULI. So what I decided to do was give you the BULI Chronicles. So I'm going to give you the Chronicles of BULI, how we got started, why we got started. We were established in 2018, as you can see, and Kamaria is going to be moving my slides for me. So thank you very much, Kamaria. Yeah, so BULI was born out of the need to prepare Black activists to resist being invisibilized in the response to HIV criminalization. We know that criminalization and HIV both go together. They're intersect, right? And so there needs to be a Black response. And so this institute that we held, it was an all-day institute. I believe there were about 70 people there, all Black people from around the country. And what we found was that this was the first time many Black people had ever been in an all-Black space. And we saw that healing justice was something that was happening. And for some people, they actually exhaled years, exhaled generations of tension during that day together with us. I'm going to move to the next slide and just let you know, hey, we were decked out in our finest tribal fashions, and we went to work. And the first order of business was to acknowledge the historic criminalization of Black people and the threat that the HIV criminalization was going to bring to us, right? And acknowledge that we needed a Black response. And so the day went on, and here are a lot of the folks who actually attended, not all of them, but these are some of the folks who attended. And these are folks that we all know in our community. Some of us, most of us know these folks. And it was a wonderful day to have them there. And what we learned, what the immediate thing that I saw, one of the immediate successes of BULI was when we emerged into the full conference, we emerged with a new type of empowerment and being able to center ourselves in discussions that were pertaining to Black people. One of the things that visibly stood out for me was that when we came into the plenary the next morning for the beginning of the conference, the whole 3 rows were filled with Black people. The whole 3 rows of the conference, and I know that we've been subconsciously, Black people have been subconsciously trained to make ourselves small, subconsciously trained, subliminally trained to make ourselves invisible. So can you go back to Kamaria? Thank you. So what I saw was that to be able to see the visual of Black people showing up at the plenary intentionally early to get those seats in the front, and it was a show of power, it was a show of unity, and it was one of the immediate successes that we saw from BULI. And so that's something I just would never forget. And I wanted to share that with you all, how powerful a moment that felt for me and a lot of us. Thank you, Kamaria. We can go to the next slide. So I was already talking about strength, right? Because the bullies, we came out of the conference, we appeared to be stronger, we were stronger, and we were more confident. We went into other sessions where we became more verbal in other sessions around policy sessions, and a particular session where they were speaking about rape and intimate partner violence. Men suffer through those same types of situations, and so we made sure that came out, that it was mentioned, and even going beyond the space of even going forward, as people, what we would do, we were calling out when people were being misgendered. We were calling out when people were making racial statements, and it was a different atmosphere in the HINAC Training Academy 3 than it had been in 2, because this is the 4th one. I've been to all of them, but 3 really was pivotal for Black activists. And this BULI became a movement. So the moment became a movement, and it became a movement because we had so much support from organizations like Black AIDS Institute, Positive Women's Network, right? And we began to, we decided that we were going to have a BULI conference or a BULI institute at every major HIV and AIDS conference, either whether it was scheduled event or whether it was going to be organic pop-up event. We were going to always make sure that the Black leaders who were fighting against HIV criminalization, every time there was a conference, we were going to have this gathering. And so very much powerful that this became a movement. And we all know HIV is not a crime, criminalizing it is. And this is what we're fighting. We're fighting back against being criminalized for basically for just knowing our status, right? For just knowing our status. So we're fighting back because criminalizing HIV is criminal itself. And so BULI began to take shape. We developed a purpose statement of who we are, which I'm going to read to you right now. The Black United Leadership Initiative. And let me say this, now we're an initiative. When we started off, we were an institute. Originally, the name was Black United Leadership Institute. So the Black United Leadership Initiative is a coalition of Black leaders who provide rudimentary dirt level, thank you, Brian, dirt level grassroots advocacy and rapid response. Cultivating leadership in our communities and other affiliate organizations with a unified analysis, mandating an end to HIV criminalization and the historic criminalization of Black people. So that is our statement of who we are. And we can go to the next slide. Yeah, and then we wanted to define our priorities because we wanted to be accountable to this process. So our major priorities were to connect larger movements to end HIV criminalization, to connect our Black group with larger movements, to provide direct support to Black people who are facing criminalization, emergency response support, and also to networks, to get networks around advocacy, around state and local advocacy, criminalization, and the modernization efforts. Modernization, some were doing modernization, some were working on other types of ending HIV criminalization, but we wanted to network with local advocates and statewide advocates, and also continue educational development around this barrier to a quality of life for Black people. Around the criminal justice system has always, we've been over represented in the criminal justice system, talking about Black people all the time. And here was another way. So we wanted to make sure that people understood that there was a correlation and that they were definitely connected. HIV criminalization and the historical criminalization of Black people were one and the same fight. So so conferences like here we are now at HINAC, having this plenary, having the pre-institute. So we were committed to having to be visible at all of these conferences, the biomedical conference, the United States Conference on HIV and AIDS, and also HINAC. So BULI we've made that commitment and we are accountable to those priorities. So we began providing direct support to community members. We began responding to people's letters, help raising legal fees for folks who were incarcerated or facing incarceration, developing models for rapid response. And also we began creating relationships with journalists who were always like write problematic stories and perpetuate negative, dominant narratives about people living with HIV and dehumanizing them, right, in the process. So we also, that BULI became a place for Black attorneys where they could grow their perspectives. And we definitely committed to working on repealing HIV criminalization laws versus modernization of HIV criminalization laws, right? So that was not a compromise for us, and pushing back against being identified as sex offenders, because that's one of the things that happens to people, and also building this multi-generational movement. So we began providing this kind of support, to direct support to some of our community members. Sanjay Johnson actually attended the BULI Institute and felt comfortable enough to let us know afterwards that he needed some support, he needed some help. He was actually looking at 30 years in prison as a sex offender and sex offender registry. We were able to raise funds for him, support him, give letters, support his mother, and make sure that he had the type of legal representation that he needed. Sanjay, I'd like to say, is not in jail, that he received like 5 years probation. He has to pay some fines, but when he came home, he had a place to stay, he had health care, he had a job. Those are the things. So we went beyond him and his incarceration, but also helping him get settled as he came back home. And so we're a big fan of him. He's a big fan of ours. And this is what direct action looks like. Nishan is Williams is still incarcerated, and we've been advocating for him for the last couple of years. He's clearly, if someone mentions HIV 1,000 times in your trial, then we know that you have sentence enhancement, and yeah, and so he's been in jail for a lengthy amount of time, and it's time for Nishan to come home, and we continue there. Go to the next slide, please, because this is brand new. He's still there. Day of Action, which was Monday, June the 7th, and we're still and these hashtags are still good. You can go to Twitter and you can follow the feed and see where these calls to action take us. This is the HIV Law Center, the Center for HIV Law and Policy, which is supporting trying to get Nishan back home to his family. And the next slide, I wanted to talk about some of the BULI trailblazers, and I apologize already if I'm leaving anybody out, but so I'm older, my memory doesn't always serve me well, but I know Arnita was there. And now these are not just founder members. When I say trailblazers, these are folks who are keeping BULI, continuing to help BULI grow. Arnita was there, Max Boykins, Kenyon Farrow, Diane Buckholder, Robert Suttle, Cedric Pulliam, Deidre speak. We always say just Deidre. Everybody knows who Deidre is. It's great when you get so famous, you can just say your first name, right? So Deidre was there, Mark Hughes, Tiami Luckett was there, Devin was there, Benita was there, Tony Michelle, Brian Jones, and of course you. And you are here with us today. And I think this is the next slide, where we get the opportunity to warmly welcome other Black leaders to unite with us with this extraordinary movement. And I want to say a historic and a historic movement, but this is a movement that has never happened before around HIV criminalization. So of course we face some challenges, and most of those challenges around capacity, but we've been building our structure, and we're in a much better space because we have support from Black AIDS Institute, we have support from Policy Women's Network, and BULI feels like that we really have a home. So what we need now is for you to welcome you into the space, and we welcome all other Black leaders who want to be a part of this movement. Oh, and one more thing, if you want more information, right, you can reach out to Devin Hursey. His email is here, or you can reach out to myself, Wahida the Legend, and we'll be happy to let you know when we're having these meetings. I believe that is my last slide. Thank you. I'm gonna turn it back over to, I guess I'll turn it over to Kenyon.
Thank you so much, Wahida, for covering so much of the history and how we got to this point with BULI. I'll just talk a little bit about some of the things that, feeling kind of some things that happened after that institute a few years ago, and the BULI Institute that we just had last week, and kind of where things are going. So first and foremost, I think as Wahida kind of laid out, one of the things that was, I think, kind of really important for sort of Black folks in this movement was, one, obviously to, kind of have a Black specific space to sort of talk about these issues. And two, I think to also begin to unpack how to help folks who are working in coalitions in their different states begin to address some of their concerns about racial justice and the HIV criminalization movement in those localities. And then third, to think about HIV criminalization within the larger context of criminalization of Black folks in the United States, right? And also I'll say too, one of the things that that I have still maintained being a part of since BULI is actually an international sort of coalition called Challenging Criminalization Globally. And so on 2 occasions since the last HINAC and BULI, I've actually presented on BULI's work to 2 international groups of folks who are working on criminalization. Both they're working on, so it's folks from all over the world who are working on HIV criminalization, criminalization of abortion, criminalization of LGBT folks, of homelessness, and of drug users and sex workers, right? So it's kind of this national. So we are also kind of talking to folks across the globe about the strategies that we're using here in the United States. So that's been interesting to be a part of as well. So to some of the things that have happened since, as Wahida reported after the first BULI a couple of years ago, I kind of turned everything that came out of that meeting into a report, which went to the BULI folks. I have it here. I can share it with the with attendees here. I think it's fine. We Wahida kind of reported like a lot of what the report covered in terms of like how the actual first meeting went and what it. So I don't need to go over many of those. But I will say this, that in the kind of recent BULI institute that we had last week, one of the things that seemed to kind of emerge in that conversation was, one, really, again, not just expanding their, the kind of work around HIV, focusing, on HIV criminalization, but also what are the other sort of like intersectional issues that are around the nexus of HIV and the criminal justice system. And so there was a lot of focus on sex and sex work as kind of sites of criminalization, right? One, we talked a lot about just kind of, again, kind of reiterating how we define criminalization, writ large, and just to, give a quick, definition. So, for us, we talk a lot about just the processes through which, different kinds of actions can become illegal, right? Actions become crimes only after they have been culturally or legally defined as crimes, right? Like people are just doing what people do in a lot of cases, but it's actually, you know, both either kind of informal systems like culture or legal, you know, more kind of state regimented sort of practices that make things crime. And often criminalization, when we talk about that term, happens when political forces manipulate public fears about a group of people who then become targeted for police surveillance and control, right? And that happens through, you know, HIV criminalization as well as other, you know, issues. So we spent a lot of time in this recent BULI talking about sex work. And so there was a panel discussion with myself, Tony Michelle Williams, and Fatima, Fatima's last name, I think Fatima Muhammad, who talked, you know, about the kind of, say again, Shabazz, thank you. Of course, Wahida, you would know. Thank you. So yeah, Fatima Shabazz about just the nature of how sex work itself becomes a site of criminalization, and oftentimes, you know, that kind of the discovery that a sex worker might be living with HIV becomes the sort of additional piece or the way to kind of give them a felony charge. And we've seen that. There's a report a few years ago from the Williams Institute that looked at that in California, but it was part of the advocacy that helped California reform its own laws that demonstrated that in a lot of cases, most of the folks being arrested for, you know, criminal transmission or non-disclosure were sex workers. And that's true in a lot of other states. One of the things that I talked about as well in that session was, so there's not just, so there's obviously sex work that kind of tied to one's HIV status becomes a site of criminalization, but I don't think that we talk in a general, both I think at this point, whether we're talking about the HIV movement, HIV criminalization movement, or even the LGBT movement, is the ways in which police and law enforcement officials are still actually criminalizing particularly gay men, gay or bisexual men for sex, right? That bars and clubs are still rated to this day. That, you know, people having sex in, you know, public venues and parks, et cetera, is still criminalized. People's names are published in papers, you know, and, you know, humiliated, and those kind of things are still happening, even though 18 years ago, the Supreme Court passed, you know, or made a ruling on the Lawrence v. Texas case, which was supposed to decriminalize, you know, homosexuality, if you will. But we still see ways in which that, you know, getting around that, oftentimes HIV status comes into play. That has also happened in the context of there's actually a white guy here in the state of Ohio who in Dayton, which is where I live in Cleveland, Ohio, who was arrested on an HIV criminalization non-disclosure charge here in the state just a few weeks ago. And I actually called the police department in Dayton and had a 30-minute conversation with one of the officers there. And it was very clear to me that the crime that they really were arresting him for was having a lot of sex with men who were going in and out of his house, essentially. And that was and the neighbors called. And when he disclosed to the police that he was living with HIV, that's how they charged him with non-disclosure, even though the issue really was just about the scandal of him having lots of anonymous sex. So, you know, so these things are still kind of happening. And I think for BULI, we're really thinking about, you know, as we've been, you know, just generally as a large movement, gaining more traction and changing state law. So a lot of the places that have, you know, whether it's Virginia or, you know, California and recently Missouri, and the laws are all slightly different in terms of the reform bills that have been passed. And, you know, people have different feelings about different ones. But I think as we begin to sort of move and be successful in changing the state laws around, you know, non-disclosure of HIV status as a criminal statute or whatever, we also have to begin to think about like how folks in our community who either are sex workers or who have what one might consider non-normative sort of sexual practices are also getting kind of criminalized by the virtue of having whatever sex that they're having. And so that took up a lot of our time in this last BULI meeting. Second, and I guess the last thing I'll just say is that we also had like a really beautiful kind of presentation and practice, since the theme was about sex and sexuality. We had a woman who is a sex worker, who's a pole dancer, perform for us, taught folks how to twerk and how to dance on the pole. She was in her, in her house, had the pole up, and that was really fun. And I think encouraging, not just in BULI, but in the rest of the conference, that we also begin to just think about ways to like foreground like healthy sex positivity in the conversation, because that is often, in addition to the kind of HIV criminalization laws are there because the background idea is that people living with HIV are not supposed to be having sex, right? Or that if they do, it should be criminalized. And then obviously for poor, low income, poor women of color, for queer and trans folks or what have you, that we also, despite same-sex marriage and all these things, like our sexualities are also still criminalized. And so we want to we wanted to sort of offer that kind of sex positivity embodied in the BULI presentation, the BULI Institute this year. So that's all I have for my presentation, and I'll turn it over to Devin. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for that. And thank you for bringing up this year's BULI. So as Kenyon was saying, we had a presentation by a young lady named Nikki St. John, who is, she's a pole dancer, and she was showing us how to twerk. She taught us some moves like the salt shaker and hydraulics. They were pretty advanced stuff. So I feel like we all got something out of it. It was an opportunity for us to, well, this year's BULI, people laughed and cried and everything in between. So I feel like that's really what you can expect from a BULI event. That's the culture that we really try to generate whenever we're having a pre-institute for HINAC or at USCA. We want to make sure that, we cover all the bases and allow people to, well, make sure that we're celebrating Blackness. But yeah, thank you for that. So I have some slides that I would like to go through. Perfect. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit about BULI, our approach, but this section is really supposed to be about do's and don'ts. I wanna make sure that we're leaving people with, if not ideas that they can implement or action items, at least something to think about. I feel like that would be the best use of this time. So I chose this this quote from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail, because I felt like his words here really capture a lot of the spirit that we bring as BULI. I guess I'll read it to you. So first, I must confess that over the last few years, I've been gravely disappointed by the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white Citizens Council or the KKK, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in your goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods or direct action, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. The reason why I felt like this was relevant, go back to that last slide, please. The reason why I felt like this was relevant is because, we work in coalition. We're not just working with all Black people when we're trying to modernize these laws. And I feel strongly that there is a single HIV community, but there are members of the HIV community who are either more impacted or impacted differently. And for me as a Black person, I feel like oftentimes, just using my I statements and referring to myself, I feel like oftentimes, my concerns and my connection to the subject matter is so easily dismissed. Yeah, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So the criminal justice system is not my area of expertise, but I wanted to give you just a little bit of insight, or I wanted to demonstrate just some of the ways that Black people are more impacted by the criminal justice system. So when I pulled this table, I just want to say there's some inconsistencies with other data on like how they're grouping people according to ethnicity and race. So this is one that has 4 categories, and other data that I'm going to present, they do include the Latino community. That's important to me as someone who's both Liberian and Mexican. So, but yes, Black people are heavily impacted by the criminal justice system. This is the main point that I want to make with this slide. You can go and move on. Okay, so many of us come to the work of HIV criminalization and advocacy in defense of people facing HIV criminalization. We come from an HIV background primarily. So most of us should be familiar with data that indicates that Black people have very high incidence and prevalence of HIV. So of the population in 2018, we made up 13% of the US population and 41% of people living with HIV, as well as 42% of new diagnoses that year. We can move on, thank you. And this one is an infographic of the HIV care continuum. We can see, where there's a significant drop off. Basically, what this is showing us is that there is kind of a separation between diagnosis and those receiving care, and then subsequently retained in care and virally suppressed. This really shows, go back, please, thank you. This shows that not only are we impacted by high incidence and prevalence of HIV, but we're also not well served by the public health response to HIV in this country. Okay, you can go ahead and move to the next slide. So with those things in mind, the incidence and prevalence and the way that we are represented in the care continuum, the question that I pose is really, what good does it do to just modernize your law so it's reflective of the science if we're not going to address the mens rea and the penalty level? Because we know that if we're only looking at the science, Black people are not well served by these systems. And really and truly, HIV criminalization is an extension of the public health response to HIV. So we can't rely on the science alone. We need to do something to make sure that fewer people are being criminalized. And the best way to do that is by lowering the penalty, removing the felony, because I feel like that's a real deterrent to people wanting to even engage in care. I've worked as a peer educator, and people have been afraid to really engage in care and to tell me the truth about their sexual health, their sex lives, offer me information that I can use to help them, because they're afraid of the penalty. I mean, a lot of the people that we serve have a criminal record. They're not naive to the criminal justice system. And then also the mens rea. We need to prove that people, if we are going to modernize, we need to prove that people have specific intent, that they are intending to cause harm, not that they, were negligent or reckless or did something knowingly. We need to make sure that they meant to cause harm. Otherwise, we're not really serving Black people. Without considering these things, we're not going to close disparity gaps. And so I get really worked up, but I feel like you get my point. Let's move on. So the goals of BULI, we want our space to really be a celebration of Blackness, and we want to celebrate the contribution that Black people are able to make to this work. We want to equip advocates with the skills to lead, and we want to see the end of HIV criminalization. Now I chose this political cartoon from years ago, from 1960, because it kind of reminds me of some of my experiences. We need to be clear that Black people know how to govern ourselves. We know what's best for our community. In Coalition, we're working with lawyers and policy experts who feel like they know what we need for us, but we need to be very clear that we know what's best for our community. So the do's and don'ts section. So the things that we don't want folks to do is tokenize Black leadership. We need to recognize that Black people are subject matter experts. We need to, we don't want people to create barriers to our participation. There have been times in this work that I was told that my place is only to provide anecdotal storytelling. Like I was told, I was told that by an advocate, that it's my place to share my story and to do nothing else really. We don't want to make any decisions. We don't want our coalitions to make any decisions without community. Next slide. And the do's, the big one here is we want our coalitions have to opt into accountability. So oftentimes privileged groups, white people who are not living with HIV, people who hold the power, they really have a choice as to who they want to hold them accountable or not, who they want to be truly representative of. As Black people, oftentimes our stories are used to secure funding for various initiatives that we have no control over. But these organizations have to make a conscious decision that they want to be held accountable, that they want to involve us in every level of this process. And as a result, they'll be working smarter and not harder, and there will be shared buy-in by the community. And then another do, we want the participation of Black people to be constantly reevaluated. You can feel like you've achieved or accomplished the goal of including Black people one day, but we need to make sure that we're constantly looking at how Black people are participating, how they're showing up. Do they even want to be a part of your program? Are we being fair and equitable? We need to, that's an ongoing conversation. It's not something that you just, check off of, that you can easily just check off of a box. And then, for my Black people out there, for my people living with HIV, for folks who are marginalized, for trans folks, for people who need to be at the table, I want you to know that it's your job to be disruptive. Whatever that means to you, be disruptive. Make sure that you are in the room, make sure that you are taking up space, make sure that you know that this is your conversation, this is where you belong, this is your fight, you have every reason to be there. And the other folks, the allies, they need to prove why they are relevant to this process. So by that, I want to make sure that impacted communities, those who are living with this virus, who are at risk for HIV criminalization, just know that this is your conversation and this is your table and nobody can ever take that away from you. So be encouraged with that. And then another do, engage early and often. And that's really for coalitions. If you want to work with impacted communities, make sure that they are involved in your process from the very beginning, not after something is already built, not after the fact. Make sure that from the very beginning, they're the first people that you reach out to, because community is not only the expert, we're also the gatekeeper. And if you're not engaging with community in a meaningful way, then you really shouldn't exist. And you can move on to the next slide. So this picture is really a where is Waldo, if you can find me. If you can find any of your favorite folks. So I love these beautiful smiles. This is our last in-person BULI that we had. And yeah, I feel like this picture really just captures the spirit of what we were able to pull together. So I'm gonna sit with that for a moment. And I think after this, we can go ahead and take some of the questions.
Apologies, I was multitasking. We do have a couple of questions in well, one question came up in Q&A. I've seen a couple of hands raised. I wasn't sure if our panelists wanted folks to come off mute, but one of the questions is what keeps activists from engaging with people living with HIV? And then I'll pose the second question and I'll bring all the speakers up on screen. Wait, let me read it. Are we having community conversations with HIV negative and HIV positive community members about HIV criminalization?
Kamaria, could you repeat the first question, please?
Ooh, I gotta find it in the chat box because the chat box is on fire and it is moving fast.
Kamaria, I can answer that second question from Morris while you look for that question.
Thank you.
Yeah. So thanks for that question, Morris. I, in the last few years, have really tried to engage, particularly other Black gay men who are HIV negative, like myself, on that issue, because one of the unfortunate things is that, you know, as much as, you know, in general within the Black community, we have various critiques of the criminal justice system, of police, of prisons, etc. And even among in the LGBT community writ large of whatever race, we still do not have a kind of community consensus that people should not be prosecuted for non-disclosure or transmission of HIV. And so I have really tried to push other HIV negative men to to think about what it means to call the cops on somebody for non-disclosure, especially if you took part in whatever y'all did, you know what I mean? So, and I wrote a piece a couple of years ago, I'll drop in the chat box now, from the body that actually got a lot of attention, actually got reprinted in a couple of other publications, that was saying to gay men, it's time to stop calling the police on people for non-disclosure, right? And so I really am interested in pushing that conversation more within our community, because as you know, we can do as much as we can to change the laws, but we also have to change the culture where that, with the idea that you should, you know, call, you know, involve the police, you know, in, you know, issues where somebody doesn't disclose, that should not be the case, right? So for me, that's, I've, you know, tried to do that as much as I can.
Thank you. Could I'd like to also respond to that. In Philadelphia, we held several events, community events for education around HIV criminalization. And at one event, we invited the Public Defenders Association to come to our event. And they couldn't understand why they were invited. We had to invite them over again. We had to call them and explain to them what the event was about. And finally, we had to make them understand that you need to be here because these poor folk who are being criminalized for HIV are going to be coming to you to be their defenders. So we brought the Public Defenders Association in to teach them and tell them about HIV criminalization. And then what it actually took was the law project, the AIDS Law Project of Pennsylvania, who are lawyers who work pro bono for people living with HIV. It actually took the law project to talk to the Defenders Association, and they actually trained them on HIV criminalization and how those laws impact people. So that's one of the things that we did, and we're about to do it again, you know, because they need to be reminded that the poor folks are going to be coming to the Defenders Association for legal defense.
I want to get to one of these questions. It's been posted twice. And thank you for your help, Kamaria. Any advice on how to go from token speaker to at the table? I'll tell you what has worked for me. There may be other ways to do this, but for me, I took a year to make sure that I'm just investing in other people, investing in other advocates. So everything I do in Kansas City, at least, I have what I refer to as the Goon Squad. So it's me and some folks. We started a BTAN affiliate, And we just work on everything together. We're making sure that we run everything by each other. And we're very intentional about not allowing these organizations to pull us apart, because organizations love to set you up against other Black people. So we make sure that we are tight enough to where they can't pull us apart and cause any infighting, so that we can go ahead and move our agenda forward. We share intel, we work together. These are the people that I trust. But yes, they've definitely tried to set us up against each other.
Yeah, and going from being token to being at the table, one thing that I've done is I listen very intently when I'm in those meetings. And if there's a sheet going around with people's emails where they're going to create listservs, I make sure I'm on the listserv. I make sure when they talk about next steps, I listen very carefully where the next steps are going to happen, when the next steps are going to happen, and I show up. And I just keep showing up. And I remember when I used to work with a lot of researchers, I would show up to meetings, and it would be at Columbia University. I can get to New York, you know, I'm in Philly. I would show up, and I kept showing up at these meetings with these researchers, and they kept asking me what was my area of expertise. And I kept saying to them, I'm a person living with HIV. I'm here to represent my community, even though I wasn't invited to represent my community. I felt that to be be in a place with researchers, when the questions, when they're starting the protocols, was a better place to be than to be in the cab after the protocol's already been done and all they want us to do is rubber stamp it. So sometimes we have to be really proactive about that and be willing to show up again and again. And I love what Devin said, and having somebody show up with you, right? But to listen to those next steps. Find whatever the next steps are, make sure you're a part of those next steps and just keep showing up. And you'll become an agenda item. And when they ask for if anybody has anything for the agenda, you should always have something for the agenda. And so you become relevant and you have meaningful involvement, which means that you have weight, and what you say has weight.
And then there's this question, whoever wants to take it. If it hasn't been answered, what keeps activists from engaging with people living with HIV? I can jump in.
Sure.
Let's see. So I'll say in HIV criminalization world, in this work, we work with, lawyers and, licensed professionals and folks who do a lot of policy work, but are not a part of this movement. So they may not understand the culture of the movement. I feel like a lot of folks don't realize that in HIV, your intervention is only as effective as your ability to work with and learn from community. I feel like that's something that we kind of know intrinsically within our work. Everything that we do kind of brings these really community engaged approaches, and not everybody works that way. So there's like a steep learning curve. They need to know what MIPA is. And yes, they'll agree with it in principle, but not in practice. So then you have to like train them on how to include people living with HIV and policy programmatic and funding decisions in every programmatic policy and funding decision. And then they start to feel some type of way, like you're trying to take over their organization. And it's like, yes, you have no right to be involved in this work if you're not going to effectively engage us, because you're going to end up doing more harm than good. So, I mean, that's what I would say about them.
Yeah, I would add to that, Devin, that I think too that I see a lot of tendencies in this work that the sort of policy focused folks, there's a way in which folks kind of operate where it's kind of like a lot of backroom conversations with their friends about stuff, right? And so, and that may be expedient. I literally just had this conversation the other day with a group, and I shall not name names, but it may be expedient because you have the relationship with the legislatures, with the governor's office, with CDC, with the health department officials, whoever. But if you aren't actually organizing, and organizing is different from doing policy advocacy work, the two can go together and they should, but if you aren't actually building a base constituency to bring along the way, you know, and also that you're making sure that what your approach, your policy vision matches actually where the community is, then you'll, you know, pass, you know, people get things passed all the time that's politically expedient, but it's, trying not to cuss, is terrible legislation, or doesn't suit the needs of the community, but they want an organizational win, so they could be the person there signing the bill with the governor, with the president, with this person, that person, whatever, whatever. And so for me, it's always important that we also are thinking about not just what we can do for political expediency, but are we actually building a base of leaders in communities to move, that we're moving with, right? And not just moving for, right? And that there's a different orientation. And I think that's part of the tension in that particular way around, you know, kind of community versus like folks who kind of sit in more of the kind of, you know, at more of the sort of policy advocacy tables.
I want to thank our amazing panelists today. I also just we started a couple minutes late, and I saw a question come into the question and answer, and I would like to ask if you all had the energy and capacity to take on this last question. I think it's very important for our community to be able to address this repeatedly. How do we fight burning out, getting tired of explaining lived experiences, demanding principles and oversight are there, and finally incorporating transparency and accountability? So how do we keep from being burned out while we're trying to burn stuff down? Try not to cuss like Kenyon.
I'm not good at this one. I mean, I have to be honest. Planning for HINAC, I wasn't great at this. I'm a student, and I feel like the moment that I don't speak up, somebody's life is in danger. That's how I feel, because I've seen that happen a number of times. But to go along with my diagnosis, I know that, you know, I was going and going and going until my life forced me to take a break, forced me to lay in the bed for months and go through surgery and everything else and take some time out and figure out my life. So I feel like if you don't take a break, the world is going to, you know, life is going to force you to do so. And, you know, I've had to come to terms with the fact that it's not my job to save the world. I can do a small part, but I can't do it all.
Yeah, go ahead, Wahida.
Yeah, I like to add that we have to mentor people along the way. And we don't always have to lead from the front. We can lead from the back. You know what I'm saying? So we mentor people and we teach people. Some people are willing to be activists. Everybody's not in that space. But when you find somebody that's in that space that's willing, you continue to mentor, you give them what you know, right? And that's how I've learned that I can't even leave this space until I know that I've taught someone to take this space, right? So I was taught early on that a good activist works themselves out of a job. I shouldn't be doing the same thing here 20 years from now because I've taught some folks to do it. I can move on and I can still lead, but I can lead from the back. And I think that would be the advice that I would give for burnout.
Yeah, and lastly, real quick, I also think too that, and this is something I've had to check myself on. Do I feel like my needing to be at every meeting, at every conference, at every table or whatever is a result of my particular set of my analysis, my strategy, whatever won't be present? Or is it me being a damn martyr and a narcissist, right? And that's something that we also have to check ourselves on too, is like, is it really about you? Or is there somebody there who can hold the space, right? Because especially if you're, or especially on the local level, where sometimes a lot of us are kind of the person who's like, you know, that person in the room, right? So, but as Whitey and Devin said, that, you know, it is important to also make sure that you are creating opportunities for other people to develop their leadership, be bringing other people to the table. And I'll just tell you, in every job I've ever had, I always think about who can replace me.
Yeah.
Right? From almost within a year of the job. And I may stay, I'm gonna stay longer than that typically, but I also am like, you know, it don't have to be about me holding this job for 20 years, right? I am coming here to do a very particular set of things with an agenda. I'm gonna knock that shit out the park, and then I'm gonna move on. And like, hopefully the people that I have in my mind who can do, I've helped develop, if they weren't there when I got there, there should be some when I left. So, you know, I have to think about those things in that perspective as well.
Y'all are amazing. My heart is so full. I want to thank our Spanish interpreters for keeping up with this powerful conversation. I want to thank Diane Burkholder for dropping this gospel in the chat box about not being a martyr for Black liberation. Like, queen, come on. All right, so that's a whole other conversation. I just want to thank you all again as our panelists for putting this all together, for holding space. We maintained at least 90 to 100 people throughout the hour. I dropped a link for feedback for HINAC. If you can please fill out that survey for us. Thank you all again. Take care of yourselves, love yourselves, drink some water, take a nap.
Yeah.
Be free. Bye, everyone.
Take care.